Hello everyone, Romeo Rossi CPA here. We can all feel like there's something off in the economy. Everyone I talk to lately feels like there's something going on in the air, like something is about to happen, and we're not sure exactly what it is. But everyone's feeling like there's a bunch of stuff looming on the horizon. We see all this stuff going on in the economy. We see deficit spending is completely out of control. We see that political gridlock is at an all-time high. People of opposing political parties are just not even talking to each other anymore. It's like we're all feeling like there's this shoe that's going to drop, and we're not sure exactly where or how it's going to drop. We see all these wars going on around the world, whether it's Ukraine or we're seeing what's going on in Israel, this thing looming about Taiwan and China. We all feel like there's this shoe that's going to drop. We're just not sure when or how. We see that the Fed recently announced that they're staying steady with interest rates, which in my opinion, they're not going to be dropping interest rates until 2025. If anything, interest rates might go up. The CPI numbers for May just came out. Those show that CPI is at 3.6% or 3.4 to 3.6%, depending on whether or not you believe the CPI or the core CPI, which is whether or not they're including gas and food or not. We see with housing, interest rates aren't coming down, and anyone who's got a 3% home loan, they're not selling. Inventory levels are at an all-time low. This week, active listings were around 550,000. But if you look at the same time between the years of 2012 to 2019, active real estate home listings were north of 1 million, around 1.1 to 1.2 million. So the fact that we're down to 550,000 of just active inventory is really low. We see that credit card debt is at an all-time high. We see that there's all this buy now, pay later stuff where people are starting to default. We know student loans, like student school tuition, is through the roof. Like when I went to college, I have multiple degrees. I got 2 degrees, 2 bachelor's and a master's. I think all in it cost me around $20,000. You can't even get 1 year of a bachelor's degree for $20,000 anymore. And so all this stuff is happening. You're starting to see a lot of articles and videos. People are talking about an upcoming depression. So what I wanted to do was give you guys a bunch of books that I've read that'll help you hopefully understand some of the past and what happens during these depressions or economic hard times, so that way you can kind of be prepared and well read up. The first book that I wanted to recommend was this one here, which is Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds by Charles Mackay. This book was written in the 1840s, and it covers a variety of different manias and bubbles. It actually covers the very first 3 bubbles that we had, or that the world had, and those were the Mississippi bubble, the South Sea bubble, and the tulip bulb mania bubble, which a lot of people have heard of. Not only that, it covers a whole range of different things that would get societies in a frenzy. It talked about witchery, when people were obsessed with people being witches. Alchemy, it covered the Crusades. There's a lot of interesting things in this book. I highly recommend it. A lot of economists recommend this book. Even though it's really old, I felt it was very well written. And it's the first book I recommend for you to read regarding depressions and recessions and what happens with people during bubbles. The second book I want to recommend is this book here. It's called When Money Dies by Adam Ferguson. And When Money Dies is a book that covers, it says right here, the nightmare of deficit spending, devaluation, and hyperinflation in Weimar Germany. This is one of many economists' favorite books. And this book, what Adam Ferguson goes over, he talks about everything that happened in Germany during the Weimar Republic that caused them to have such crazy hyperinflation that it led the people in Germany to eventually elect Adolf Hitler. And in this book, you start reading about how at the beginning, the Germans weren't sure what they were going to do because they lost the war, and how France and the Allies, at least some of the Allies, not America, but the rest of the Allied countries really wanted Germany to pay for the war. And so what happened was they start printing money, and it caused this hyperinflation. And so to put you guys in a little bit of the perspective is that you see that some German citizens would have saved up to 3,000 Deutschmarks for their life savings. And that 300,000 marks was a pretty good retirement. And it's something they could hand off to their kids, or they could live off in retirement. And then all of a sudden, within a very short period of time, I'm talking about like a year or less, 300,000 Deutschmarks could no longer buy you a stamp to mail a letter from Germany to London. And so what happened is the people in Germany started blaming their government. And you notice it's the populism. It caused a lot of populism and a lot of fighting politically. And eventually people started rallying around Hitler. And the thing that I found interesting in this book is that Ferguson talks about how during this period of hyperinflation, when the currency became stabilized and it wasn't inflating, Hitler was losing ground politically. Like, people didn't find him interesting when the economy was steady. But as soon as the hyperinflation picked up again, the German people started rallying around Hitler again. It was really fascinating. It was a really good book. I really enjoyed it. I highly recommend this. It teaches a lot about what happens in a society when there's real, true hyperinflation. Third book I recommend is this book here. It's called The Great Depression, A Diary by Benjamin Roth. Benjamin Roth was an attorney that lived in Youngstown, Ohio during the Great Depression. This book was written in 2009. And Benjamin's son had gone and found a bunch of Benjamin's diaries and found how he was writing a daily journal about what was going on during the Great Depression in Youngstown, Ohio. And you have to think back during the 20s, Youngstown, Ohio was a really important, popular city to live in. Like, Ohio was huge in the 20s. It's as big as, or as important as, maybe Miami or Austin are today. And so you read the daily account of what a person is thinking and what is going on day to day as they are living through the Depression. Now, there were certain years in which they couldn't find his diaries, and he was an avid writer, so he would write something down in his diary almost every day. But for the years he did cover during the Great Depression, it was just fascinating reading about the day-to-day thoughts of how they were going to make money, how they were going to eat, what they thought politically. Thought this was an excellent book to get you in the mindset of what happens during a depression. The fourth book that I wanted to recommend to you guys was this book here, which is Currency Wars by James Rickards. This was written in 2010. And what Rickards talks about in this book is about how countries fight each other using currencies and political might without having a hot war. He discusses the different currency wars that have happened in the past, and he talks about how America has been in a currency war since 2010. And right now the current currency war, tongue-tied, right now the current currency war that is going on, according to Rickards, is that a bunch of countries around the world are trying to get the world off US dollars. If you're not aware, a bunch of countries have created something called the BRICS currency, which is Brazil, Russia, India, China. They've added South Africa. They're trying to add more countries. And the whole idea is to get the world off US dollars, so the US is no longer the reserve currency. I find his interviews in this book really good, so I highly recommend reading it. And the last book that I wanted to recommend was this one here, which is The Storm Before the Calm by George Freeman. The subtitle is America's Discord, the Crisis of the 2020s, and the Triumph Beyond. This book was written in 2020, so it's the newest out of all the books that I recommended. In this book, what George Freeman theorizes is that the country goes through two different types of cycles. It goes through an industrial cycle that takes 80 years, and it goes through a second cycle, which is a socioeconomic cycle that takes about 50 years. And he argues in the book that these two cycles are coming to an end at the very same time. And these cycles create new beginnings for the country. And he argues that it's creating this divisiveness that's going on in the country right now. And that a lot of things he mentions in that book are mostly a theory about what's happening or what's going to happen in the future. And he talks about a lot of the problems that everyone knows about. He talks about how there's a lot of entitlement spending for Social Security and Medicare, how student loan tuition is out of control. He talks about how there's not enough people having children. And I found the book very interesting because it gave a theory on what's to come moving forward. So it's a really good book. I highly recommend it. It's modern, so it goes pretty fast. Now, some of you are probably wondering, why didn't I mention Ray Dalio's new book, The Changing World Order? And the reason why I didn't mention it is because everyone's heard of it. Ray Dalio is everywhere. He has made tons of videos. He's got tons of interviews. He's been on a lot of podcasts. He's the person who I believe really made the public or most people understand what the reserve currency status is. And he originally built a hedge fund, one of the largest hedge funds in the world. And there was an animation producer named Jonathan Jarvis that created an amazing video called The Crisis of Credit. I'll put a link to it. If you haven't seen it, I recommend watching it. And Ray Dalio went and hired Jonathan to be the producer of his videos, which is The Changing New World Order, and also How the Economic Machine Works in 30 Minutes. So I've read all of Ray's books. I recommend reading them. However, if you watch the videos, you could get the most important parts of his books. because it's a lot of books I mentioned. The other person I wanted to mention was Nassim Taleb. He's written a bunch of books called the Inserto series. He pretty much coined the term or popularized the term Black Swan from his book, The Black Swan. Out of all the books he's written, the one that I find the most important is the book Anti-Fragile. So if you had to read only one of his books, I would recommend reading that one. So just as a recap, I do feel like the country is in a weird place, and most people do. And I really feel like reading these books will give you a lot of insight and help moving forward to think about, in case there is a recession or a depression coming, what you can do. And I know it's a lot of books I mentioned, so don't feel obligated to read all of them. Pick one or two of them. And if there was one I would choose to start with, it would be the one by Charles Mackay, Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds, just because it's broken up into small little chunks, so you can read the parts you find fascinating and disregard the ones you don't. I'm never really good at ending these things, so thanks for watching. And if there are any other books you think I should have listed that I missed, let me know in the comments. Thanks.